Captain Kim Tae-ho wiped the sweat from his forehead as he stared at the control panel of the salvage ship Iron Will. The old vessel creaked and groaned as it moved through the empty darkness of space. For 3 months now, he and his small crew had been collecting scrap metal and broken ship parts in the outer edges of known space. Far from the safety of human colonies, the work was hard and dangerous, but it paid well. Old military equipment, abandoned mining gear, even pieces of alien technology could be worth a fortune if you knew where to sell them. Kim's crew were all former soldiers who had served together during the border conflicts. They trusted each other with their lives, which was important when you worked in places where help was days away. Lee Minna sat at her station, monitoring dozens of communication channels at once. Her job was to listen for salvage opportunities, distress calls from ships in trouble, or warnings about pirates in the area. She had been doing this work longer than anyone else on the crew and could identify different types of signals just by their sound patterns. Suddenly, something strange appeared on her screens. The signal was weak and broken, cutting in and out like a radio with bad reception. But there was something about it that made her sit up straight and pay attention. "Captain, you need to hear this," she called out, her voice tense with excitement. Kim walked over to her station, followed by Park Jun-ho, who had been cleaning their weapons in the corner. The ship only had a crew of 6 people, so everyone wore multiple hats and helped with different jobs as needed. Min-R played the signal through the speakers. It was unlike anything they had heard before. The sounds were musical, almost like singing, but underneath the beauty was something desperate. Even without understanding the language, anyone could tell this was a cry for help. "The computer is trying to translate it," Mina explained, pointing to lines of text appearing on her screen. "It's definitely not human, and it's not from any of the usual alien traders we deal with." Park Jun-ho leaned closer to look at the data. As their weapons expert, he also handled security and threat assessment. "Where is it coming from? Please don't tell me it's from the Dead Zone." The Dead Zone was what spacers called the region of space that the Galactic Council had marked as off-limits. Ships that went there rarely came back, and those that did brought stories of mechanical monsters that could not be reasoned with or defeated. Minna's face was grim as she pointed to the star map. "It's coming from the Villani system, right in the middle of the restricted area." Kim felt his stomach drop. He had heard stories about the Villani from other salvage crews. They were supposed to be a peaceful people who had never hurt anyone. Their planet was beautiful, covered in crystal cities that sparkled like jewels. But something called the Harvesters had found them. The Harvesters were machines, not living beings. They traveled from system to system, destroying everything in their path. What made them truly terrifying was their ability to learn and adapt. Every weapon used against them, every tactic tried, they would study and develop defenses against. The Galactic Council had sent their best warships to stop them, but the machines had destroyed them all. "Captain," Minna said quietly, "the translation is getting clearer. They're asking for help. They say their world is dying and their people are running out of places to hide." Park Jun-ho shook his head. "Boss, we can't get involved in this. The Council has strict rules about unauthorized contact with alien species. If we interfere, we could end up in prison for the rest of our lives." Kim stared at the star map, watching the blinking dot that marked the Villani system. He thought about his own family back on Earth, how he would feel if they were trapped and calling for help while the universe ignored them. "The Council already tried to help them," he said finally. "Their best ships, their smartest generals, their most advanced weapons, all failed. The Villani have been left to die because saving them is impossible." "So what are you thinking?" Park Jun-ho asked, though he already knew the answer from the look in his captain's eyes. Kim turned to face his crew. These were people who had followed him through impossible battles before. They had survived fights that should have killed them all. They were humans from Earth, A world so dangerous that most aliens considered it uninhabitable. I'm thinking, that impossible is just another word for Tuesday, Kim said with a slight smile. Set course for the Vellani system. We're going to answer that call. The moment the iron will emerged from hyperspace, Captain Kim knew they had arrived in hell. The beautiful crystal cities that the Vellani were famous for were now burning ruins. Scattered across the planet's surface, massive fires created orange and red scars that could be seen even from orbit, and thick black smoke covered entire continents. Joy, Sung-min, their pilot, gripped his controls tighter as he watched the destruction below. He had seen war before during his military service, but this was different. This was not a battle between armies, or even an invasion by conquerors who wanted to claim territory. This was systematic extermination, cold and mechanical, like watching insects being sprayed with poison. The harvester ships hung in space around the planet, like giant metal spiders. Each one was different from the others, their hulls constantly shifting and changing shape as they worked. Some were long and thin like needles, designed for precision strikes against specific targets. Others were massive and blocky, built to carry the heavy weapons that could destroy entire city blocks with single shots. "Captain, I'm picking up over 60 enemy vessels," announced Yang Soyoung from her position at the sensor station. "And more are coming through some kind of portals. I've never seen technology like this before." The dimensional rifts that the harvesters used were tears in space itself, glowing purple wounds in reality that allowed the mechanical invaders to appear instantly anywhere they wanted. As Kim watched, 3 more ships emerged from a new rift, their weapons already charging to continue the bombardment of the planet below. Suddenly, Choi Sung-min's communication board lit up with an incoming signal. The image that appeared on their main screen was unlike anything the humans had ever seen before. The being was tall and graceful, with skin that looked like it was made of living crystal. Light seemed to flow through its body in patterns that changed with its emotions, and its large eyes held intelligence and desperate sadness. "Unknown vessel," the alien said, its voice carried by some kind of universal translator that struggled to convert the musical tones of its language into words humans could understand. "You must leave this system immediately. I am Counselor Thix, of the Vellani High Council. Our world is lost. The harvesters cannot be defeated." The despair in the alien's voice was heartbreaking. This was clearly a being whose entire civilization was dying, and it was using its last moments to try to save strangers from sharing the same fate. "The mechanical invaders learn from every attack we make against them," Counselor Thix continued, the crystal patterns in its skin flickering with fear. "They study our weapons, our tactics, our technology. Within hours, they develop countermeasures that make our defenses useless. The Galactic Council sent their greatest warships to help us. Admiral Koroth himself led the fleet. They were destroyed in less than 2 days." Captain Kim had heard of Admiral Koroth. The alien commander was famous throughout the galaxy for never losing a battle. His fleet was considered the most powerful military force in known space, equipped with weapons that could crack planets in half and shields that could withstand the explosion of stars. "Captain," Park Junho whispered, "if Koroth's fleet couldn't handle these things, what chance do we have? We're just a salvage ship with some old military weapons." Kim studied the tactical display that showed the overwhelming enemy forces. 60 harvester ships, with more arriving every few minutes. His single small vessel, with a crew of 6 humans, and weapons that were already outdated when he bought them. The smart thing to do would be to run, to escape while they still could, and report what they had seen to the authorities. But then he looked at Counselor Thix's face on the screen. Behind the alien, he could see other Vellani, moving frantically, trying to coordinate evacuations and rescue operations, even as their world burned around them. These were people fighting to save their families, their children, their entire species. "Counselor Thix," Kim said, activating his own communication system. This is Captain Kim Tae-ho of the human vessel Iron Will. We received your distress signal, and we're here to help. The change in the alien's expression was immediate and startling. The crystal patterns in its skin shifted from the dark blues and purples of despair to brighter colors that seemed to indicate hope or surprise. Humans, Counselor Thiggs said, its large eyes growing even wider. But your species is not part of the Galactic Council. You have no treaties with us, no alliances, no obligations. Why would you risk your lives for complete strangers? It was a fair question, and Kim could see his own crew looking at him, waiting for his answer. Why were they here? Why had they traveled into the most dangerous region of space to help people they had never met? Because someone called for help, Kim said simply, and where we come from. When someone calls for help, you answer. Yang So-young stared at her computer screens, her fingers moving rapidly across the keyboard as she analyzed the enemy forces surrounding the Valani planet. As the ship's tactical expert, it was her job to assess threats and find weaknesses that could be exploited. What she was seeing made her feel sick to her stomach. The data was crystal clear and absolutely terrifying. The harvesters were not just advanced machines, they were learning machines. Every time someone fired a weapon at them, they studied how it worked and built defenses against it. Every tactical move used against them was recorded, analyzed, and countered. They were like a virus that became immune to medicine after being exposed to it just once. Captain, you need to see this, she said, transferring her analysis to the main display screen. These things don't just have advanced technology, they evolve their technology during battle. Look at this footage from the Council fleet's attack. The recording showed Admiral Koroth's massive warships engaging the harvesters 3 days earlier. At first, the Council's plasma cannons were effective, destroying several enemy vessels. But, within hours, the harvester ships had modified their hulls to absorb and redirect plasma energy. The same weapons that had worked in the morning were useless by afternoon. It gets worse, Yang continued, pulling up more data. They adapt their tactics too. The Council tried a flanking maneuver that should have worked perfectly. The harvesters let them complete it, studied how it was executed, then used the exact same strategy against the Council ships with improvements. Park. Junho looked up from the weapon systems he had been checking. His face was grim as he processed what Yang was telling them. So you're saying that fighting these things makes them stronger? Exactly, Yang replied. Every battle they win makes them better at winning the next battle. They fought hundreds of different species across the galaxy. They've learned from every single encounter. They know every military strategy, every weapon type, every defensive formation that anyone has ever used against them. The silence in the ship's bridge was heavy as the crew absorbed this information. They were not just outnumbered 60-1. They were facing an enemy that had already defeated the best military minds in the galaxy and learned from those victories. Choi Sungmin, still monitoring communications from the planet, received another transmission from Counselor Thiggs. The alien's crystal skin was now showing patterns of deep purple and black, colors that clearly indicated despair and resignation. Human vessel, I must tell you the truth about our situation, the Valani leader said. Our planetary defense grid will fail within 2 days. We have moved our children and elderly to the deep underground shelters. But the harvesters will eventually break through, even those barriers. We estimate that our entire species will be extinct within 1 week. Captain Kim watched the tactical display. Seeing the harvester ships methodically destroying the planet's remaining cities, the mechanical invaders worked with perfect coordination, like parts of a single massive organism. There was no emotion, no hesitation, no mercy. They simply consumed everything in their path. This is suicide, boss, Park Junho said bluntly, voicing what everyone was thinking. These machines have defeated enemies with thousands of ships, weapons we can't even imagine, and military experience spanning centuries. The Galactic Council's best admirals studied these things for months, before attacking, and still lost 80% of their fleet in less than 3 days? Limina looked up from her communication station. Captain, I'm receiving emergency broadcasts from across the galaxy. 7 other species have been completely wiped out by these same harvesters in the past 2 months. The Council has officially classified them as an unstoppable force and issued orders for all ships to avoid harvester-controlled systems. Yang Soyoung pulled up her final analysis. Sir, based on our ship's capabilities and weapons, we have approximately 0% chance of success in direct combat. Our plasma cannons are identical to ones the harvesters have already adapted to. Our ship's armor is weaker than the Council vessels they destroyed. Even if we had surprise on our side, which we don't, the mathematics are impossible. Captain. Kim studied the data flowing across his screens, absorbing every detail of the hopeless situation they faced. The harvesters were perfect learning machines that grew stronger with every battle. They had absorbed the knowledge and tactics of hundreds of conquered civilizations. They operated with mechanical precision that never made mistakes. But then, Kim thought about something Yang had said. The harvesters had learned from hundreds of different species across the galaxy. They knew every military strategy that anyone had ever used against them. Every strategy that had been tried by advanced civilizations with massive fleets and sophisticated weapons. The Council thinks like the Council, Kim said slowly, an idea beginning to form in his mind. All these advanced civilizations, they all approach problems the same way. Logically, systematically, predictably. He turned to face his crew, seeing the confusion in their faces. But we're not the Council, he continued. We're not an advanced civilization. We're humans from Earth, a planet so dangerous that most aliens think it's uninhabitable. We learn to survive by being unpredictable, by doing things that don't make sense, by fighting dirty when we have to. Park Jun-ho raised an eyebrow. Captain, are you suggesting we can beat these things by being stupid? Kim smiled for the first time since they had arrived in the system. I'm suggesting we beat them by being human. He looked around at his crew of former soldiers, people who had survived impossible situations before, by refusing to give up. I won't order anyone to stay, he said seriously. This isn't officially our fight. But I'm not leaving while innocent. People are dying, and there's even a tiny chance we can help. One by one, his crew members nodded their agreement. They were scared. They knew the odds were impossible, but they were also human. And humans had a long history of doing impossible things. Limina had spent 3 hours studying the Way Harvester. Ships scanned for incoming threats. The mechanical invaders were incredibly thorough, their sensors detecting everything from large warships to tiny escape pods. But she had found something interesting in their search patterns. The machines ignored objects that moved like natural debris, assuming they were just pieces of destroyed ships floating randomly through space. Captain, I think I can get us down to the planet without being detected, she announced. But you're not going to like how we have to do it. The plan was insane. Instead of flying down to the planet like a normal ship, the Iron Will would tumble through the atmosphere like a piece of space junk, spinning and falling in a pattern that looked completely out of control. Limina would have to calculate every rotation perfectly to make sure they didn't actually crash while appearing to be nothing more than debris from the orbital battle. Choi Sung-min, their pilot, went pale when he saw the flight plan. Mina, this is impossible. One mistake, and we'll be scattered across the planet's surface. Then don't make any mistakes, Captain Kim said simply. Can you do it? Choi Sung-min looked at the calculations again, then at his captain's determined face. Give me 5 minutes to study this pattern. If we're going to die, I at least want to understand how. The descent was the most terrifying experience any of them had ever lived through. The ship spun wildly as it fell through the atmosphere, alarms blaring as the hull heated up from atmospheric friction. Through the spinning viewports, they could see the planet's surface rushing up toward them at incredible speed. At the last possible moment, Choi Sung-min fired the engines and pulled them out of the dive, landing the ship in the ruins of what had once been a beautiful crystal city. The Villani, who met them at the landing site, were unlike any aliens the humans had encountered before. They were tall and elegant, with skin that looked like living glass and eyes that had dozens of facets like jewels. Everything about them spoke of a species that had evolved in peace, never needing to fight or hide or struggle for survival. Counselor Thix led them through underground tunnels to a command center buried deep beneath the city. The other Villani leaders gathered around the humans, their crystal skin flickering with colors that seemed to indicate curiosity and hope. "We have tried everything we can think of," explained Commander Vel, the leader of what remained of their military forces. "Our energy shields, our plasma weapons, our defensive formations. The harvesters adapt to all of it within hours." Captain Kim and his crew spread out through the command center, studying holographic displays that showed the city's layout above ground. But where the Villani saw their beautiful home being destroyed, the humans saw something very different. "Your defensive positions follow a clear pattern," Choi Sung-min observed, pointing to the tactical map. "You've set up barriers at all the logical choke points, positioned your weapons to provide overlapping fields of fire, and created clear evacuation routes for civilians." "Of course," Commander Vel replied, sounding confused. "That is proper military doctrine, according to the Galactic Council's standard procedures." Park Jun-ho laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That's your problem right there. You're fighting by the rules. The harvesters have seen these same tactics used by every military force in the galaxy. They know exactly what you're going to do before you do it." Yang So-young was examining one of the Villani energy barrier generators, her engineer's mind already working on modifications. "These shield emitters are incredibly sophisticated," she said, "but you're only using them defensively. What if we reversed the polarity and added some power couplings from your city's main reactor?" The Villani engineer who was helping her looked horrified. "But that would turn our protective barriers into weapons. Shields are not meant to be used offensively. It goes against every principle of defensive engineering." "Exactly," Yang grinned. "The harvesters won't expect it because it's not supposed to be possible." Over the next several hours, the humans began implementing changes that shocked and amazed their Villani hosts. They took the aliens' beautiful city squares, designed for peaceful gatherings and cultural celebrations, and turned them into death traps. Decorative fountains were rigged with explosives. Artistic sculptures were converted into weapon platforms. Even the crystal walkways that the Villani loved were modified to become collapsible bridges that could drop enemy forces into carefully prepared kill zones. "This is horrible," whispered one of the Villani civilians, watching Park Jun-ho show their security forces how to set up ambushes in their own homes. "You are turning our paradise into a nightmare." Captain Kim paused in his work modifying a communication relay into an improvised electromagnetic pulse weapon. "I know this is hard to watch," he said gently. "Your people built this city as a place of beauty and peace. But right now, beauty and peace won't save your children's lives. Sometimes you have to destroy something to save it." The humans created false evacuation routes that led nowhere, designed to lure harvester ground forces into prepared ambushes. They rigged entire buildings to collapse at the touch of a button, turning the aliens' own architecture into weapons. Most disturbing of all, they began teaching the peaceful Villani how to fight dirty, how to use improvised weapons, and how to think like predators instead of prey. Lee Minna worked with the Villani communication technicians to set up a network of false signals designed to confuse and misdirect the harvesters. "The machines expect logical communication patterns," she explained, "so we'll give them chaos instead. Random signals, contradictory orders, fake emergency broadcasts. We'll make their own intelligence gathering work against them." As night fell over the ruined city, The transformation was complete. What had once been a place of crystal beauty was now a maze of traps, ambushes, and hidden weapons. The Villani looked around at their changed home with a mixture of horror and fascination. "Will this actually work?" Counselor Thix asked quietly. Captain Kim checked his improvised weapons one last time. "I honestly don't know," he admitted. "But I do know one thing. Tomorrow, when those machines come for your people, they're going to face something they've never encountered before. They're going to face humans who have nothing left to lose." The Harvester ground forces moved into the ruined Villani city at exactly dawn, just as their analysis programs had calculated would be most efficient. The mechanical soldiers were perfect killing machines, each one built from adaptive metal that could reshape itself based on threats encountered. Their central processors contained the combat data from thousands of conquered worlds, making them nearly unstoppable. The machines advanced in perfect formation through the crystal streets, their sensors scanning for the standard defensive positions they expected to find. Based on their analysis of Villani military doctrine, they predicted exactly where the enemy would be hiding and what weapons would be used against them. Their learning algorithms had already prepared countermeasures for every possible tactic. Captain Kim crouched behind what appeared to be a typical military barricade, watching the mechanical invaders approach through his binoculars. Beside him, Park Junho checked his weapon one last time, a modified Villani mining laser that looked like standard military equipment to enemy scanners. "Here they come," Kim whispered into his communicator. "Everyone remember, stick to the plan, but be ready to throw it out the window if things go wrong." The Harvesters moved with mechanical precision toward the human positions, their adaptive armor already configured to resist the plasma weapons they expected to encounter. Their tactical computers had calculated the most likely attack patterns and prepared responses for each one. They were completely unprepared for what actually happened. As the machines moved to flank the human positions, Yang So-young triggered the modified energy barriers from her hiding spot 3 blocks away. But instead of creating protective shields, the barrier generators had been rewired to reverse their polarity and focus inward. The result was a crushing gravitational field that caught the Harvester units completely by surprise. The mechanical soldiers found themselves pulled toward the center of the field with incredible force. Their adaptive armor, designed to resist energy weapons and kinetic impacts, was useless against gravitational forces that literally tore them apart at the molecular level. In seconds, a dozen Harvester units were reduced to scrap metal. High above the planet, Lee Mina monitored the enemy communications from her position aboard the Iron Will. What she saw on her screens made her heart race with excitement. "Captain, something incredible is happening," she reported over the radio. "The Harvester command frequencies are going crazy. Their processors are overloading, trying to analyze what just happened to their ground units." The mechanical invaders' learning algorithms were designed to study enemy tactics and develop countermeasures within hours, but they had never encountered tactics that seemed to violate the basic principles of warfare. How do you adapt to weapons that aren't supposed to exist? How do you counter strategies that seem to be based on pure insanity? In the underground tunnels beneath the city, Choi Sungmin led a group of Villani civilians through maintenance passages that should have been certain death traps. The narrow tunnels were filled with broken pipes, leaking toxic gases, electrical cables sparking dangerously, and sections where the ceiling had partially collapsed. "This is impossible," whispered one of the Villani, his crystal skin flickering with colors of fear. "No military force would use these passages. They're completely unsafe." "Exactly," Choi Sungmin replied with a grin. "That's why the Harvesters won't expect us to be here." The group emerged behind the Harvester lines carrying weapons that looked like they had been built in someone's garage. Yang So-young had taken Villani mining equipment, construction tools, and even kitchen appliances, and turned them into improvised weapons that didn't appear in any military database. A Vellani civilian fired what looked like a modified food processor, sending a stream of superheated plasma that cut through a harvester unit like butter. Another used a construction drill that had been converted into a kinetic weapon, punching holes through mechanical armor that was designed to stop military-grade ammunition. The harvesters' predictive models crashed completely. Their processors had analyzed every known weapon type in the galaxy, but they had never encountered mining lasers used as sniper rifles, or construction equipment converted into artillery. The machines stood motionless for several seconds, their systems overloaded trying to process impossible data. Park Jun-ho took advantage of their confusion to launch his own attack. Instead of using standard military tactics, he did something that no sane soldier would ever attempt. He ran directly at a group of harvester units, screaming at the top of his lungs, firing his weapon wildly in all directions. The machine's tactical computers tried to analyze his strategy and failed completely. This wasn't flanking or suppression, fire, or any recognized combat maneuver. This was just a human being too angry to care about his own safety, and the harvesters had no programming to deal with it. Before the mechanical invaders could adapt, Park Jun-ho had thrown himself behind their lines and detonated an improvised explosive device that Yang So-young had built from Vellani household chemicals. The blast destroyed 3 harvester units and damaged several others, all across the city. Similar scenes were playing out. Humans and Vellani fighters were using tactics that made no logical sense, weapons that shouldn't exist, and strategies that seemed designed to get everyone killed. The harvesters learning algorithms, which had successfully adapted to every military force in the galaxy, were encountering something they couldn't process. Pure human stubbornness, mixed with desperate creativity. Captain Lee Mina's voice crackled over the radio, barely able to contain her excitement. "You're not going to believe this, but the harvesters are pulling back. Their ground forces are actually retreating." Captain Kim looked around at the ruined city, where humans and aliens were fighting side by side with improvised weapons and impossible tactics. For the first time in their expansion across the galaxy, the unstoppable harvesters had encountered something they couldn't adapt to: beings who refused to fight by any rules at all. Well, Kim said into his communicator, "I guess today we find out what happens when an unstoppable force meets people too stupid to know they can't win." News of the human intervention at Vellani had spread through the underground communication networks that connected smugglers, pirates, and independent traders across human space. These networks carried information that governments preferred to keep quiet. Stories that never made it into official reports or news broadcasts. The message was simple. A small human crew was fighting impossible odds to save an alien species that no one else would help. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and completely alone. Within hours of the first reports, ships began changing course toward the Vellani system. Captain Lim Hyun-jin was hauling medical supplies to a mining colony when he heard the news. His converted cargo ship Steel Dragon didn't look like much from the outside, but hidden in its cargo holds were 20 former members of Korean special forces who had left military service to work as private security contractors. When Lim heard about the situation at Vellani, he didn't hesitate. "Change course," he ordered his pilot. "We're going to help some people who need it." His crew didn't question the decision. They had served together in places where help never came, through official channels, where survival depended on soldiers looking out for each other, regardless of nationality or politics. If fellow humans were in trouble, that was all they needed to know. The Steel Dragon dropped out of hyperspace 3 hours after Captain Kim's initial assault on the Harvester ground forces. Lim's crew saw the impossible tactical situation immediately. One small human ship facing dozens of mechanical invaders. But they also saw something else. The harvesters were confused, their movements less coordinated than their reputation suggested. "Looks like someone has been causing trouble down there," observed Lieutenant Cho, Minwoo Lim's second in command. "Should we announce ourselves?" "No time for proper introductions. Lim replied. Just start shooting. The steel dragon had been modified with weapons that were technically illegal in most star systems. Military-grade plasma cannons hidden inside cargo containers, missile launchers disguised as communication arrays, and armor plating that could stop anything short of a direct hit from a battleship. Lim's crew opened fire on the harvester ships without warning, using tactics they had learned fighting insurgents in urban environments. Minutes later, Captain Baisujin's pirate fleet emerged from hyperspace. Her ships were fast, lightly armed. Vessels designed for hit-and-run attacks on merchant convoys. The Night Wind, Ghost Rider, and Storm Dancer had been painted flat black to make them harder to detect, and their crews were experts at fighting dirty. Well, Bay announced over the communication channels. Looks like we have a proper fight on our hands. My people love a good underdog story. Her pirates immediately began using tactics that made even the Special Forces veterans nervous. They would dart in close to harvester ships, fire everything they had, then disappear before the mechanical invaders could respond. When their weapons ran out of ammunition, they would ram enemy vessels and teleport their crews to safety at the last second. The third wave of reinforcements arrived an hour later, led by Captain Oh Dong-wook, commanding a fleet of mining vessels. These ships were built for the dangerous work of asteroid mining, where crews had to deal with claim jumpers, pirates, and equipment failures that could kill everyone aboard. The miners had learned to fight with whatever tools they had available. We brought the heavy equipment, Oh announced as his ships moved into position. The mining vessels carried industrial lasers capable of cutting through solid rock, explosive charges designed to break apart asteroids, and cargo manipulators that could crush a normal ship like an empty can. Each group of human volunteers brought their own unique approach to combat. The Special Forces used coordinated military tactics adapted for space warfare. The pirates relied on speed, deception, and willingness to take insane risks. The miners fought like they were dealing with dangerous equipment, carefully, methodically, and with tools that could destroy anything they touched. Captain Kim coordinated the growing fleet from his position on the planet's surface, using communication equipment that Yang So-young had jury-rigged from Volani technology. Listen up, everyone, he broadcast to the assembled captains. The harvesters learn by analyzing patterns and developing countermeasures. But we're not going to give them any patterns to analyze. Every ship fights their own way, changes tactics constantly, and never repeats a successful strategy. The plan was beautiful in its chaos. The Special Forces would use precision strikes to eliminate high-value targets. The pirates would create confusion with random attacks from unexpected directions. The miners would focus on destroying the largest enemy ships with their industrial equipment. No two ships would use the same approach, and no successful tactic would be used twice. Counselor Thix watched the human reinforcements arrive from the underground command center, his crystal skin flickering with colors that indicated amazement and confusion. I do not understand, he said to Yang So-young, who was monitoring the space battle from her improvised command post. These humans have no treaties with us, no alliances, no obligations to risk their lives for strangers. Why did they come? Yang looked up from her screens, where she was tracking dozens of human ships engaging the harvester fleet in what could only be described as organized chaos. That's what humans do, she replied simply. Someone calls for help, and we answer. It doesn't matter if we know you or not. It doesn't matter if our governments have paperwork saying we're allies. When people are in trouble, humans show up. She gestured toward the tactical display showing the space battle above them. Those aren't soldiers following orders from some high command. They're volunteers who heard that people needed help and decided to do something about it. Pirates and miners and ex-military contractors who should be enemies are working together because that's what you do when innocent people are dying. Counselor Thix stared at the display, watching human ships perform impossible maneuvers to protect a species they had never met before. Your species is very strange, he said quietly. Yeah, Yang smiled. We get that a lot. The battle that followed became the stuff of legend, not because it was the largest space engagement in galactic history, but because it was the most chaotic. Captain Kim had convinced a diverse group of human volunteers to coordinate their assault. But coordination for humans meant something very different than it did for other species. Captain Lim Hyunjin positioned his converted cargo haulers in a formation that hadn't been seen in space combat before. His ships linked their shields together and moved forward like an ancient Korean turtle ship, creating a protective shell around the smaller pirate vessels. The formation was over 1,000 years old, developed for naval warfare on Earth's oceans, but somehow it worked perfectly against harvester energy weapons. The mechanical ships are targeting our strongest shields, reported Lieutenant Cho Min-woo from his position aboard the Steel Dragon, but they can't penetrate the overlapping defensive fields. Inside the protective formation, Captain Bae Soo-jin's pirates darted around like sharks in the water. Her crews had studied the tactics of Earth's greatest naval raiders, learning lessons from pirates who had terrorized the Caribbean seas centuries ago. They would appear from behind the turtle ship formation, strike fast at harvester vessels, then disappear back into the protective shield bubble before the mechanical invaders could respond. Hit and run, just like the old days, Bae laughed over the communication channels as her ship Night Wind disabled a harvester cruiser with a perfectly placed shot to its engine systems. Except instead of sailing ships, we're using spaceships, and instead of stealing gold, we're stealing victories. But it was Captain Oh Dong-wook's mining crews who proved to be the most devastating force in the battle. Their industrial equipment had been designed to tear apart asteroids and extract valuable minerals from solid rock. Against harvester ships, the mining tools became weapons of incredible destruction. The deep drill fired its ore extraction beam directly into a harvester battleship's hull. The industrial laser, designed to cut through the densest materials in space, sliced the mechanical vessel in half like a hot knife through butter. Asteroid braking charges, normally used to fragment space rocks for easier mining, were fired at enemy ships and detonated with the power of small nuclear weapons. These machines are tough, Oh reported as his crew destroyed their third harvester cruiser. But they're not tougher than the asteroids we deal with every day. The harvesters' learning algorithms tried desperately to adapt to the human tactics, but they faced an impossible problem. Every time they developed a countermeasure for one type of attack, the humans would switch to a completely different strategy. The mining crews would switch from industrial lasers to explosive charges. The pirates would change from hit-and-run tactics to ramming attacks. The military contractors would shift from defensive formations to aggressive boarding actions. In the most insane moments of the battle, human crews would abandon their own ships just seconds before collision with harvester vessels, using emergency teleportation systems. They would transport directly onto the mechanical ships and begin sabotaging them from the inside. The harvesters had never encountered boarding tactics before, since most galactic species considered it too dangerous and unpredictable. "This is Captain Park from the Stray Dog," came one transmission over the battle communications. "We've taken control of a harvester-heavy cruiser, turning their own weapons against the rest of their fleet now." Down on the planet's surface, Captain Kim was leading the final assault against the Harvester Command Center. The mechanical invaders had learned to counter every conventional weapon the humans possessed, but they hadn't prepared for what happened when humans ran out of conventional options. When their plasma rifles stopped working against adapted harvester armor, the assault teams switched to kinetic weapons, basically guns that fired metal bullets at high speed. When the mechanical invaders adapted to those, the humans began using improvised clubs made from Valani construction materials. When all technology failed, they fought with mining tools, kitchen knives, and anything else they could get their hands on. Park Jun-ho had volunteered to hold a critical corridor that led to the command center's main entrance. For 6 straight hours, He fought off wave after wave of harvester assault units, using a Volani mining laser that Yang Soyoung had modified far beyond any safety specifications. The weapon should have exploded from overheating within the first hour, but Park had disconnected all the safety systems and was cooling it with water from broken pipes in the walls. "The gun is literally on fire," he reported over his communicator, "but it's still shooting, so I'm still fighting." Meanwhile, Lee Minna had managed to hack into the Harvester communication network from her position in the underground command center. Instead of just monitoring their tactical communications, she was actively feeding false information back into their systems. She would take real Harvester tactical data and introduce subtle errors that confused their learning algorithms. "I'm telling their ships that our mining lasers are actually plasma cannons," she explained to Yang So-young. "So they're adapting their armor to resist plasma, while we cut them apart with industrial tools." The corruption of their own intelligence networks was something the Harvesters had never experienced before. Their perfect learning algorithms began making mistakes, developing countermeasures for threats that didn't exist while leaving themselves vulnerable to the actual attacks coming their way. As the battle raged on, both in space and on the planet's surface, something unprecedented began to happen. The Harvesters, who had never lost a major engagement in their expansion across the galaxy, were not just being defeated, they were being completely outfought by opponents who refused to follow any logical patterns. For the first time in their existence, the mechanical invaders were learning a lesson they had never encountered before. Sometimes, the best strategy is to have no strategy at all. The final breakthrough came from the most unexpected source. Choi Sung-min, who had started the mission as just a pilot, found himself working alongside Volani engineers in the deepest levels of the Harvester command complex. The mechanical invaders had built their central processing core like a fortress, protected by layers of adaptive armor and defensive systems that had learned to counter every weapon used against them. But Choi had an idea that didn't involve weapons at all. "What if we don't try to destroy their computer?" he suggested to the Volani engineers who were helping him navigate the alien technology. "What if we just give it a problem it can't solve?" Working together, they managed to access the Harvester Central Intelligence Network. Instead of trying to hack or damage the system, Choi introduced something far more dangerous to a machine mind, a logical paradox. He fed the computer a simple statement that created an impossible loop. This statement is false. The machine intelligence, which had been desperately trying to analyze and understand human behavior throughout the battle, suddenly focused all its processing power on solving this unsolvable problem. If the statement was true, then it was false. If it was false, then it was true. The computer's vast mind trapped itself in recursive loops, trying to find a logical answer to an illogical question. Within minutes, the entire Harvester fleet began to malfunction. Ships that had been perfectly coordinated started flying in random directions. Weapon systems fired on their own allies. The mechanical invaders, who had conquered hundreds of worlds through perfect logic and adaptation, were destroyed by their own inability to accept something that made no sense. The few Harvester vessels that were still functional opened dimensional rifts and fled the system. Their perfect order, shattered by a simple paradox that any human child could have understood and ignored, as the last enemy ships disappeared into the purple tears in space. An eerie silence fell over the Volani system. After days of constant battle, the sudden quiet felt almost unnatural. Slowly, carefully, the Volani began to emerge from their underground shelters. They came up into a world that had been transformed by war. Their crystal cities were ruins, their beautiful landscapes scarred by weapon impacts, and their skies still filled with the debris of destroyed ships. But they were alive, and their children were safe. Captain Kim stood in what had once been the central plaza of the Volani capital, now just a crater filled with broken crystal and twisted metal. Around him, his surviving crew members were helping. wounded aliens and humans alike, using emergency medical supplies from their ship's cargo hold. The cost of victory had been terrible. Of the 63 human volunteers who had answered the Villani distress call, only 34 were still alive. The Night Wind, Captain Bei Sujin's pirate flagship, had been destroyed in a ramming attack against a harvester battleship. The deep drill had exploded when Captain Oh Dong-wook overloaded its mining lasers to take out the last enemy cruiser. Ships and crews that had arrived as strangers had died fighting together like family. Yang So-young approached Captain Kim, her face showing exhaustion and worry. She carried a portable communication device that was receiving transmissions from across the galaxy. "Captain, we have a problem," she said quietly. "The Galactic Council has been monitoring our activities here. They're sending official diplomatic protests to the human government, demanding that we be arrested and prosecuted." She read from the list of charges on her screen. Unauthorized first contact with a non-council species, violation of non-interference protocols, engaging in military action without galactic sanction, use of illegal weapons, modifications, and conspiracy to undermine council authority. Park Jun-ho, who was sitting nearby cleaning his modified mining laser, laughed bitterly. "So let me understand this correctly. We saved an entire species from extinction, defeated an enemy that their best military forces couldn't handle, and now they want to throw us in prison for it." Counselor Thix, who had been listening to the conversation, approached with several other Villani leaders. His crystal skin showed patterns of confusion and anger. "The council would punish you for saving our people?" he asked in disbelief. "We sent distress calls for months. We begged for help. They told us our situation was hopeless and marked our system as a restricted zone. It's all about proper procedures," Yang explained with frustration. "The council has rules about who can make first contact, when military intervention is authorized, and how conflicts should be resolved. According to their regulations, we should have filed reports, waited for committee approval, and followed diplomatic channels, while our children died." Another Villani leader said quietly. Captain Kim looked around at the humans who had followed him into this impossible fight. Captain Lim Hyun-jun was helping repair a damaged Villani medical facility. The surviving pirates from Bei Sujin's crew were sharing their food supplies with refugee families. Miners who had never met these aliens before were working to restore power to the underground shelters. They were heroes to the people they had saved, but criminals in the eyes of the governments they served. "So what do we do now?" asked Lieutenant Cho Min-woo, speaking for many of the survivors who faced the same terrible choice. Captain Kim studied the faces around him, humans who had risked everything for strangers, and aliens who were alive because someone had finally answered their call for help. "We could go home," he said slowly, "face trial, maybe spend years in prison, but eventually return to our normal lives." He paused, looking up at the stars, where more distress signals were probably being broadcast at that very moment. Calls for help that would go unanswered, because they came from the wrong species or the wrong sector of space. "Or we could stay out here," he continued, "where people need help that's never going to come through official channels." The decision, when it came, was not really a decision at all. It was simply an acknowledgement of what they all already knew. In their hearts, they were no longer citizens of human space. They had become something else entirely. 3 months had passed since the Battle of Villani, and the small moon orbiting the planet's outer edge had been transformed from a barren rock into humanity's first unofficial base outside their own territory. The Villani had insisted on helping build the facility, using their crystal-growing technology to create structures that were both beautiful and practical. Captain Kim stood on the observation deck of the main command center, watching human and Villani engineers work together to install communication arrays that could monitor distress signals from across the galaxy. The base had grown far beyond what he had originally imagined, with docking facilities for dozens of ships, repair bays for damaged vessels, and living quarters for the growing number of human volunteers who continued to arrive. The story of how a handful of humans had defeated the unstoppable harvesters had spread through the galaxy's underground communication networks like wildfire. Volani traders carried the tale to every port they visited, speaking in amazed tones about the Deathworld humans, who had answered a call for help that everyone else had ignored. More importantly, other species had begun to take notice. Races that the Galactic Council had written off as too primitive, too dangerous, or too remote, were learning that there were beings in the galaxy who would actually respond to cries for help. "Captain, we've got another group of volunteers incoming," announced Lee Minna from her expanded communication center. 15 ships this time, including some people I recognize from the outer colonies. The volunteers came from all walks of human life. Former military personnel who were tired of bureaucracy that prevented them from helping people in need. Traders and miners who had seen suffering in the Outer Rim territories and wanted to do something about it. Even former criminals who had found a cause worth fighting for. They called themselves the Outer Rim Guard. But the aliens they helped had given them a different name. Throughout the galaxy's frontier regions, species spoke in whispered tones about the Deathworld wardens, humans, who would appear whenever someone was in desperate trouble and could not get help through official channels. Captain Lim Hyen's cargo ship Steel Dragon had been completely refitted as a mobile rescue platform. His former Special Forces team had become experts at evacuating civilian populations from war zones, natural disasters, and other emergencies. They could drop into the most dangerous situations and extract people who had been written off as impossible to save. "We pulled another 3,000 refugees from the Bayer system yesterday," Lim reported during the weekly command meeting. "The council said it was too dangerous to attempt a rescue because of the solar storms. Took us 6 hours, and we didn't lose a single person." The surviving pirates from Captain Bei Sujin's crew had also found a new purpose. Instead of raiding merchant ships for cargo, they now hunted the slave traders and criminal organizations that preyed on vulnerable species in lawless regions of space. Their fast ships and knowledge of pirate tactics made them perfect for tracking down criminals who thought they were beyond the reach of justice. "Intercepted another slaver convoy near the Tertian Nebula," reported Captain Jin Haewon, who had taken command after Bei's death. "Freed 200 captives and sent their ships back to their home worlds. The slavers won't be bothering anyone anymore." Captain Oh Dongwook's miners had become the galaxy's most effective siege-breaking specialists. Their industrial equipment could cut through any barrier, and their experience with dangerous environments made them ideal for extracting trapped populations from hostile territories. "The situation on Kepler 7 is resolved," Oh announced with satisfaction. The corporate security forces had sealed 3 mining communities underground and were planning to let them starve. "We opened up their barriers in about 20 minutes and made sure the workers got safely off-world." Lee Minna's communication center had become the nerve center for the entire operation. She monitored hundreds of channels simultaneously, listening for distress signals from species that the Council had abandoned. Her screens showed a constant stream of emergency transmissions from across the galaxy. Calls for help that would never be answered through official channels. "Captain, we're receiving a priority distress signal from the Quarish system," she announced during one of their regular briefings. Her voice carried the same urgency that had started their entire journey months earlier. "Long-range sensors are detecting harvester ships in the area. Looks like a major incursion." Captain Kim studied the tactical display showing the distant star system. The Quarish were a peaceful species, similar to the Volani, known for their advanced mathematics and beautiful architecture. They had no military to speak of, and no way to defend themselves against the mechanical invaders. Around the command center, his crew prepared for another impossible mission. Yang Soyoung began calculating hyperspace routes that would get them to Quarish space as quickly as possible. Park Junho started checking their weapons and ammunition supplies. Choi Sung-min filed a flight plan with the base's traffic control. They were no longer the desperate crew of a single salvage ship, hoping to make a difference. They had become something much more powerful, the commanders of humanity's first unofficial rescue fleet, leading volunteers who had chosen exile over inaction. Signal the fleet, Captain Kim ordered, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility that came with impossible odds. All available ships, prepare for immediate departure. Tell them we have people who need help. Throughout the base, alarms began to sound as ships powered up their engines and crews rushed to their stations. The Iron Will, now accompanied by over 30 volunteer vessels, began moving toward the hyperspace jump point. Captain Kim took one last look at the Vellani moon base, where humans and aliens worked together to monitor the galaxy for cries for help. They were criminals in the eyes of the Galactic Council, heroes to the species they protected, and legends to a universe that was slowly learning what humans were capable of when someone needed help. Set course for Korish, he commanded as the Iron Will engaged its hyperspace drive. Someone's calling for help, and we're going to answer. The fleet disappeared into the swirling vortex of hyperspace, carrying with them humanity's most dangerous gift to the galaxy. The absolute certainty that no matter how hopeless the situation, no matter how impossible the odds, somewhere out there, someone would always come when you called for help. The legend of the Deathworld Wardens had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same.